You grew up in a dysfunctional household on welfare. You've talked about this before. What were, for you personally, psychologically, some difficult moments in your childhood?
I'll answer that question in a slightly different way, which is that I think when you grow up in a household that's defined by physical abuse and psychological abuse, you're hyper vigilant all the time. And so it's actually easier for me to point to moments where I was happy or I felt compassion or I felt safe. Otherwise, every moment, I'll give you a couple of examples. I was thinking about this a while ago. There was a tree outside of my apartment where we lived when I was growing up. And my father would make me go outside to take the tree branch that he would hit me with. And so you can imagine if you're a 10, 11-year-old kid and you have to deal with that, what do you do? Well, a hypervigilant child learns how to basically estimate the strength of these branches, right? How far can he go before it breaks? You have to estimate his anger and estimate the effective strength of branches and bring back something because I remember these moments where if it was he would look at it and then he would make me go out again and get it, right, get a different one. Or there was a certain belt that he wore that had this kind of belt buckle that stuck out, and you just wanted to make sure if that was the thing that you were going to get hit by, that it wasn't the buckle facing out, because that really hurt. And so you became hyper aware of which part of the buckle was facing out versus facing in those moments. And there are like hundreds of these little examples, which essentially I would say the through line is that you're just so on edge, right? And you walk into this house and you're just basically trying to get to the point where you leave the house. And so in that microcosm of growing up, any moment that's not like that is seared in my memory in a way that I just can't describe to a person. I'll give you an example. I volunteered when I was in grade 5 or 6, I can't remember which it was, in the kindergarten of my school. And I would just go and the teacher would, ask you to clean things up. And at the end of that grade 5 year, she took me and 2 other kids to Dairy Queen. And I'd never gone to a restaurant, literally, because we didn't have the money. And I remember the first time I tasted this, this Dairy Queen meal. It was like a hamburger, fries, a Coke, and a Blizzard. And I was like, what is this? And I felt so special, because you're getting something that most people would take for granted. Oh, it's a Sunday, or or I'm really busy. Let me go take my kid to fast food. I think that, until I left high school, I think, and this is not just specific to me, but a lot of other people, you're in this hyper vigilant loop, punctuated with these incredibly visceral moments of compassion by other people. A different example, we had such a strict budget and we didn't have a car. And so, I was responsible with my mom to always go shopping. And so I learned very early on how to, look for coupons, how to buy things that were on sale or special. And we had a very basic diet because you have to budget this thing really precisely. But the end of every year where I lived, there was a large grocery chain called Loblaws. And Loblaws would discount a cheesecake from $7.99 to $4.99. And my parents would buy that once a year. And we probably did that 6 or 7 times. And you can't imagine how special we felt. Myself, my 2 sisters, we would sit there, we would watch the New Year's Eve celebration on TV. We would cut this cheesecake into, 5 pieces. It felt like everything. So that's sort of how, my existence when I was at that age is, for better or for worse, that's how I remember it.
The hypervigilance loop, is that still with you today? What are the echoes of that that's still with you today, the good and the bad?
If you put yourself in the mind of a young child, the thing that does to you is at a very core basic level, it says you're worthless, right? Because if you can step outside of that and you think about any child in the world, they don't deserve to go through that. And at some point, by the way, I should tell you, like, I don't blame my parents anymore. It was a process to get there, but I feel like they did the best they could. And they suffered their own issues and enormous pressures and stresses. And so, I've really, for the most part, forgiven them.
How did you, sorry to interrupt, let go
Yeah.
of that blame?
That was a really long process where, for I would say the first 35 years of my life, I compartmentalized and I avoided all of those memories. And I sought external validation, right? Going back to this self-worth idea. If you're taught as a child that you're worthless, because why would somebody do these things to you? It's not because you're worth something. You think to yourself very viscerally, you're worth nothing. And so then you go out and you seek external validation. Maybe you try to go and get into a great college. You try to get a good job. You try to make a lot of money. You try to, demonstrate in superficial ways with the car you drive or the clothes you wear that you deserve people to care about you, to try to make up for that really deep hole. But at some point, it doesn't get filled in. And so you have a choice. And so for me, what happened was in the course of a 6-month period, I lost my best friend and I lost my father. And it was really like the dam broke loose because the compartmentalization stopped working because the reminder of why I was compartmentalizing was gone. And so I had to go through this period of disharmony to really understand and steelman his perspective. And can you imagine trying to do that, to go through all of the things where you have to now look at it from his perspective and find compassion and empathy for what he went through? And then I shift, the focus to my mom and I said, well, you were not the victim, actually. You were somewhat complicit as well because you were of sound mind and body and you were in the room when it happened. So then I had to go through that process with her and steelman her perspective. And at the end of it, I never justified what they did, but I've been able to forgive what they did. I think they did the best they could. And at the end of the day, they did the most important thing, which is they gave me and my sisters a shot by emigrating, by giving up everything, by staying in Canada, and doing whatever it took between the two of them to sort of claw and scrape together enough money to live so that my sisters and I could have a shot. And I'm very thankful for them. Could they have done better? Obviously. But I'm okay with what has taken place. But it's been a long process of that steel manning so that you can develop some empathy and compassion and forgive.
Do you think if you talked to your dad shortly after he died and you went through that process, or today, you'll be able to have the same strength to forgive him?
I think it would be a very complicated journey. I think I've learned to be incredibly open about what has happened and all of the mistakes I've made. I think it would require him to be pretty radically honest about confirming what I think he went through, because otherwise it just wouldn't work. Otherwise, I would say, let's keep things where they are, which is I did the work, with people that have helped me, obviously, but, it's better for him to just, kind of hopefully he's looking from some place and he's thinking it was worth it. I think he deserves to think that all of this, because, I think the immigrant challenge, or not even the immigrant challenge, the lower middle class challenge, anybody who really wants better for their kids and doesn't have a good toolkit to give it to them, some of them they choke up on the bat. They just get so agitated about this idea that all this sacrifice will not be worth it, that it spills out in really unproductive ways. And I would put him in that category.
And their self evaluation, introspection, they have tunnel vision, so they're not able to often see the damage they did. I mean, I know, like yourself, a few successful people that had very difficult relationships with their dad. I mean, you take the perspective of the dad, they're completely in denial about any of it. So if you actually have a conversation, there would not be a deep honesty there. And that, I think that's maybe in part the way of life.
Yeah. And, I remember pretty distinctly after I left and in this, in my middle 30s, where, by all measure, I had roughly become reasonably successful. And my dad didn't particularly care about that, which was so odd because I had to confront the fact that, whether it was a title or money or press clippings, he never really cared. He moved on to a different set of goals, which was more about my character and, being a good person to my family and really preparing me to lead our family when he wasn't there. And that bothered me because I thought I got to the finish line and I thought there was going to be a medal, meaning like I can tell you, Lex, he never told me that he loved me. I'm not sure if that's normal or not. It was my normality. And I thought there's going to be something, some gold star, which never appeared. And so that's like a hard thing to kind of confront because you're like, well, now what is this? What is this all about? Was this all just kind of a ruse? But then I realized, well, hold on a second. There were these moments where, in his way, again, putting yourself in his shoes, I think he was trying to say he was sorry. He would hold my hand, and he would interlock the fingers, which I felt that's a really intimate way of holding somebody's hand, I think. So I remember those things. So, these are the things that are just etched in, at least in my mind. And at the end of it, I think I've done a decent job in repairing my relationship with him, even though, it was posthumous.
It does make me wonder in which way you and I, we might be broken and not see it. It might be hurting others and not see it.
Well, I think that when you grow up in those kinds of environments, and they're all different kinds of this kind of dysfunction, but if what you get from that is that you're not worthwhile, you're less than many, many other people, when you enter adulthood or, semi-adulthood in your early 20s, you will be in a cycle where you are hurting other people. You may not know it. Hopefully you find somebody who holds you accountable and tells you and loves you enough through that. But you are going to take all of that disharmony in your childhood and you're going to inject that disharmony into whether it's your professional relationships or your personal relationships or both until you get to some form of rock bottom and you start to repair. And I think there's a lot of people that resonate with that because they have each suffered their own things that at some point in their lives have told them that they're less than. And then they go and cope. And when you cope, eventually those coping mechanisms escalate. And at some point, it'll be unhealthy, either for you, but oftentimes it's for the people around you.